from the European Commission, Mr. Risto Revio, in order to have his highlight as a great witness. So I leave the floor to you. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you again, and okay. There, what?
As you want, the floor is yours. Here.
If that works, then I prefer that, yes. Yes, thank you very much. Great witness. I tend to say rather that a humble civil servant. That's what I'm doing. I'm serving the general interest in my job, and this is part of my job, to be together with you and see how things develop in this area. I was asked to say some words about the European strategy, the disability strategy, and then to reflect a little bit about the legal evolution in relation to social enterprises, and also about the future political agenda, EU agenda on social enterprises. Concerning the disability strategy, actually Cyril made a strong reference to that in his presentation today, and also made the link, the context in relation to the UN Convention on Rights of People with Disabilities. And there, of course, a very important central element is this right to have a opportunity to exercise employment in open labor markets. That is, of course, a strong element in the current strategy of disability strategy within the European Union. There are 8 principles in the current strategy. I don't go through all of them. There is a process now preparing, of course, the future strategy, the strategy from 2020 to 30, if it again takes a 10 years cycle. In that process, it's in a very early stage, a kind of consultation with stakeholders, organizations in the field is coming up, and the services that are in charge of that, they are preparing that. So I cannot say very much about that. Your representatives were in a workshop, as it was said also today, a couple of weeks ago in Brussels, which was already looking at the future perspectives, but really the process is in the early phase. However, there is another process. I mean, Europe is very much about processes. There are different policy processes going on, and what is currently on the table is what is called the pillar of social rights. Commission made this spring a very comprehensive proposal, initiative, and it's called Pillar of Social Rights, and the rights is it's an important element in the name, in that way that it's an approach that the social issues are looked from the perspective of rights, and also from the perspective of principles, and what is the kind of intellectual storyline there? What is the dynamism that this proposal is seeking for? Is what we call upwards convergency, so that the systems, the social area systems and phenomena, they would converge gradually, but the convergence is towards those that are benchmarked as, let's say, better systems, rather than going down in countries that have already established a good level. And when you look at the whole different dimensions in the social area, you find these good practices benchmarks in different countries, depending the area you are looking at. And in that pillar of social rights, there are three dimensions, three areas that Commission is proposing that all the member states engage to work on in order to improve the situation and to get this upwards convergence to going on. The first one is equal opportunities and access to labor markets. This is very much what we have been talking about today also. The second is fair working conditions. And the third one is the social protection systems. And actually, the issue of rights of people with disabilities is explicitly mentioned in the third pillar, but of course it is a very relevant element in relation to the two other areas. We have been today notably speaking about this access to labor markets, inclusive access to labor markets, but also the question of fair working conditions. I think somebody said it is in the DNA of inclusive enterprises to create and offer these fair working conditions. Similarly, also if you look at the pillar of social rights, or if you look at the previous or current strategy of disability, you find next to employment the issue of education. And the issue of education and training, the lifelong learning, is very strongly embedded also in the pillar of social rights. And there the concept of lifelong learning is very important. I was very happy to hear the previous panel about the skills development, the professionalization. It is important that the concept of lifelong learning is transformed into practice, so that also when we are dealing with the issue like people with disabilities and their access to labor market, that is not an end point, but it's just one step in the lifelong learning perspective, and we can speak about lifelong career perspectives also. We know how labor markets are changing today. There's a lot of discussion about that, and one of the most popular subjects actually today to be discussed is future of work. How the work is changing for the future. And in that context, the lifelong learning, the opportunity to continuously broaden, improve, and reorient the skills and competencies, that is getting more and more important. And I think your companies are well placed also in that context to show some good practices, to show how it can be done. Now, about, still one word because it's about processes. So the pillar of social rights, it was Commission's proposal, and it's kind of interinstitutional proclamation. That's a new word for me also, but so that other institutions and the member states would commit themselves to these principles. And the expectation is that next month this kind of proclamation could be done. There will be what is called social summit in Sweden, in Gothenburg, and expectedly the proclamation is done at that context. And so then it is very much after that about implementation and monitoring how this convergence is going to happen. And in Commission proposals there is a whole series of measures how to monitor and observe the situation. Now, about the legal situation and development when it comes to social enterprises, that is a very difficult issue. It's one of my main work issues, what I have on my table now. Commission already did a couple of years ago what we call mapping of situation of, we call it social enterprises and their ecosystems in member states. We covered all 28 member states and Switzerland at that time. And what we found out there was a huge diversity and very difficult to measure and, for example, provide reliable and comparable figures about the number of social enterprises, about the turnover, about the employees, how many they employ and so on. And so it was difficult in the first exercise, which was published 2014, and after that there has been indeed quite a lot of development. So we are currently starting an update of these country reports, trying to achieve a better estimations of the situation, also more adequate description of the situation, and of course also up to date, because a lot has changed. I give you some examples of the difficulties there, and one would be just about identifying that what are social enterprises in a given country, how many they are, and in which kind of categories they belong to. If I take my own country, Finland, so country where I used to live more than 20 years ago, there has been two approaches towards the issue of social enterprises. There is a law on social enterprises, and this law is very narrow. Conceptually, it wouldn't match with what I presented today as a concept. It only concerns work integration companies, companies that employ people which would have a difficult access to labor markets. That is the crucial element for companies to get a legal status as social enterprise in Finland. And it has never been very widely used. There are less than 100 companies that have been using this category. There wouldn't be profit distribution rules, for example, and there wouldn't be governance rules about participatory governance. So if I take the presentation that I had earlier, I had the three elements there. This Finnish law would match with two of them, but not with the third one. And secondly, it's not very widely used. There are many other companies who also employ people who have challenges to integrate in labor markets, including people with disabilities, but who did not want to get this legal status. Now, I have understood that this is, but I don't know details about that, but it's probably going to disappear, this legal category in Finland. There has been, since a couple of years, another approach, which is a kind of label, that companies who would fulfill criteria, they could get a label, a mark, and show that they are a social enterprise. And that has conceptually been, let's say, coherent with the European model also. So not limited to work integration, your social dimension can come also from the results of your services and products as presented. And there is a private organization, voluntary organization that is providing this label according to the certain criteria and according to certain, based on application. Well, it is a new opportunity, has been there since I think 3 or 4 years, and they have something like, I guess today, between 120, 130 companies who have this label. Again, it's a very small number, and if you ask scholars who are looking at this issue in Finland, they estimate about the number of social enterprises that de facto would fulfill the criteria. It would be something between 1,000 and 18,000. There is even a big gap between the estimations. If I go to do trekking in Lapland, like I sometimes do, and I used to do already when I was very young, I go to a place where there is a kind of national park, and the center is run by a nationwide voluntary organization that is promoting trekking and outdoor activities and healthy life. They are running there a small hotel and kind of support services for people who are doing trekking or skiing and so on. It's run by a non-profit organization. They reinvest their profits to this kind of services, and it would de facto fit within the social enterprise concept, but they don't have the label so far. Maybe next time when I go, I have to tell them, please go and apply for this label. So this is just an example, illustration about that going out there and trying to understand how many social enterprises there are, you have to go beyond the fixed categories that exist. Neither the number of those who have the legal status, neither the number of those who have the label would tell you the truth in that country. Another example, couple of years ago, 2 years ago, a group of Lithuanian stakeholders came to our offices. They were asking an appointment and discuss social enterprise issues. And actually, it turned out to be that they were on behalf of association representing people with disabilities. And what they were telling us is that in their country, there is a law on social enterprises, which is similarly, like in Finland, narrow by the concept, focusing on work integration. And those representatives of people with disabilities, they said that our feeling and the feedback what we get from our members is that this statute is misused by companies. They hire a certain number of people with disabilities in order to fulfill criteria, but there are not these governance rules that would anchor the company to the social objective, and actually it is a very profitable business sometimes to get this category because you get certain tax breaks and so on, certain benefits. I understood that Lithuania has been in the process of renewing their law on social enterprises, and again in that context they are actually aligning the legislation much more towards the European concept. So what we observe in Europe is a huge diversity, but there's again a certain convergency. European Commission is not telling countries that you have to apply this concept what I was promoting today. We have been, Commission is promoting this concept. It's saying that if you generate conditions where this kind of business can flower and develop, then you achieve certain goals, and this is what we propose, we suggest to you. But we are not telling them that you have to legislate in this way or this way or this way. This is something where countries can learn from each other, and again, Commission is facilitating that. Our mapping, for example, when we now do a new mapping and capture the realities in countries, it's again an information where countries can learn from each other, and we have seen that there is quite a lot of mutual learning happening in this area. And one concrete example of this kind of how do we support countries is what we call in-depth country reviews. And we have a cooperation with the OECD, the Organization of Economic Development, and they are on our behalf actually doing a kind of very precise review of the situation in the country, and also developing policy guidance, recommendations, and even an action plan that where to go, how you can improve the situation in your country, based on a very comprehensive, in-depth analysis. And actually, I used Lithuania as an example of where we got a little bit negative feedback once. Lithuania is also one of the countries who have now asked this kind of in-depth review, and most likely in a very near future there will be such a review done by OECD and the experts. About the social enterprise agenda, then I would say that we have currently from this Commission a commitment to continue the work, and we have identified 5 issues. One is access to finance, so that social enterprises can get investments in, so that they can develop their businesses. The other one would be access to markets, where it is about access to public markets, public procurement, but also about developing business-to-business relations. And there, for example, I think from today's conference again, we can draw lessons and show some examples from which others can get inspiration. The third issue would be what we call framework conditions, that relates to legal conditions, but also to kind of support services, networks, what you have in your country. And again, concerning the framework conditions, I think from what you have presented and what you are representing, in some countries you might have created a framework conditions for inclusive entrepreneurship or inclusive enterprises, from which we can learn and distribute some practices. Another priority area will be new technologies and new business models. And finally, then the international development, the broader international context is another area that we are looking in more details in the future. I think this was, again, a long monologue already, so I will stop it here. Thank you very much. I have learned a lot, and I will bring some messages back to offices in Brussels. Thank you very much.